Hey folks, Dr. Mike here for the Making Progress channel. Today's video is number 98, the things I learned from my favorite economist, Dr. technically, Bryan Caplan. And it is probably no secret by now to many of you that Bryan Caplan is my favorite economist. What kind of person has a favorite economist? A loser like me. So what makes me think of him so highly when the number of people in the economics profession include folks like Thomas Sowell, an amazing hero of mine, Milton Friedman, a generational level intellect? Why does Bryan Caplan get my favorite economist situation? Well, really, three things. Thing one is that he's hilarious. I'll explain why in a second. Thing two is a variety of his views are just amazingly informative and insightful like almost no one else. And they are so for a very specific reason that I'll get to in a second. And then lastly, even when I disagree with him, which doesn't happen often, but it does on occasion, I still really want to know what he thinks because he is such an unbelievably brilliant thinker in all of the ways that really matter. So number one, the hilariousness part. I think humor is a really big deal, potentially, in making things accessible to people understanding them. And Bryan Caplan is so funny that he has tried his hand, I would say quite successfully, even at stand-up comedy. And he's just like, I just like laugh out loud at many of his interviews and lectures constantly. And he's always threading it in. And so like, if you listen to him, you'll probably realize like him and I sound similar every now and again. It's because I stole much of my rhetoric from him directly. And that's just it. I think, because he's so funny, it makes his shit so accessible that he's just an unbelievable teacher. There are many people who are very, very insightful, but if you hear interviews with them, gee whiz, but it's kind of dry, it's kind of boring, and that's no good. And then number two reason why I'm a huge fan of Bryan Caplan is that he asks the tough questions that almost no one does. He does so in public and answers them too. And he's ready to surface very not politically correct ideas. And seemingly his only motive for doing so, as far as I can tell, he just happens to think that these things are true. And it's important to talk about the truth. And it kind of almost doesn't matter what perspective you take on the world, especially if you're more right or left leaning. You're going to find a lot to disagree with Bryan Caplan about. And I'm going to say this is sort of jokingly, sort of not. You're probably going to be wrong. Some of the stuff he says, you're like, there's no fucking way. It just sounds like iconoclasm for the sheer point of it. But his level of justification for his thoughts is incredibly evidence-based, deeply logical, and just probably spot on. So let's take a look at some of his big ideas right now. We're going to take a look at, I think, 5 of some of his biggest ideas that he shared over the years, see if we can't learn something. And he has very many interviews, videos, blogs, articles, and even whole books on these topics. So if you hear something you like, or if you hear something that sounds so audacious in my rapid summary of it that you're like, there's no way this is either Mike is getting this wrong or Bryan's getting this wrong, there's no way this can be true, then absolutely I encourage you to read and listen as deeply to him as possible, because after doing so, you'll come away with probably one of two reactions. One reaction is going to be, I don't agree with him. I still think on the margin somewhere he's wrong, but gee whiz, he really did think it through a lot. And at least some of the simplest ways I can refute him are kind of gone now. And the other thing is probably you're going to be like, wow, he's probably right about this, at least to a large degree. And I have to really heavily modify my worldview. And the worldview thing is such a big deal here, guys, because I will be saying a few things about Bryan Caplan's kind of 5 big ideas, or he's got many more than that, but 5 of the ones that really resonated with me and I think are important for people to hear. And you're going to hear some of this stuff right from the get-go, by the way, and you're going to be like, no fucking way. Because Bryan Caplan's that guy to have a 1 out of 100 opinion about something, and he's going to be the correct opinion almost every single time. That to me is a very, very special place in my kind of intellectual worldview, looking for the needle in a haystack ideas that are actually disagreeing with almost everyone, but are correct. And you're thinking like, okay, you like iconoclasm, and I do. I think it's dope. That's why one of my best friends is Menno Henselmans, because he's so iconoclastic in the exercise science community. But Menno's also right almost all the time. And it's not the iconoclasm by itself. It's the fact that you're able to be correct. To me, that's a huge mindfuck, because how many things do most people walk around? How many ideas do they accept completely for granted as, of course, that's true? And if it passes a couple vibe checks, and if you've been told by even experts your whole life that it's true, it's so easy to be like, duh, that's true. And someone says, well, that's not true. And you're like, okay, this guy's like a flat earther or something. And those people are wrong, of course. But Bryan's not a flat earther. He's the opposite. He is so skeptical and so woke in the best way possible, like wide awake to seeing the intricacies of the world, that a lot of the stuff he says is just downright shocking. And you look into it, it cannot possibly be this way. And then it is. Remember that consensus on something does not guarantee that it's the correct view. And remember, there is the world of evidence for this. Where's the evidence for this? Most consensus beliefs from the year 1500 all the way up to the year 2000 and till today have proven either partially incorrect or in many cases woefully lacking in understanding of the world and just downright wrong. I mean, there are quotes from experts in the late 1900s, like 1895-ish, something to the extent of everything that will ever be invented has already been invented. I mean, think about that. Before the car, before the airplane, before every appliance, before the television, before radio, before the computer. It's probably more true to say that almost nothing that will ever be invented has been invented so far. But these are smart people who are saying this kind of stuff. And if you look back at old newspaper articles of takes about politics during the Cold War, World War II, Vietnam era, etc., you're going to see these articles. You're going to be like, oh my God, these people were woefully out of touch. Well, now with 2020 hindsight, historically, it's easy for us to say. But I think Bryan Caplan's going to be one of these people, and he has been so far, that years later we look back and go, damn, dude, he was right about all this stuff. And most of us were wrong, including myself, before I read his books. And now I'm probably still wrong about a bunch of stuff, but a little bit less wrong, which is a really good place to start your intellectual journey. So here we go. Idea number one of Bryan Caplan's is also a book of his that's phenomenal called The Case Against Education. Remember when I told you guys the shit hits right up front? Who argues against education? This is insane. What are we even talking about? So what is the basic argument here? This is Bryan Caplan's, I would say, kind of broadside attack, his argument against mainstream education. He's basically saying that a huge fraction of formal schooling in modern countries doesn't actually build useful skills. It's mostly signaling who is able to do work and who isn't, who will be a productive employee and who isn't. And the problem with signaling is you could do it for a tenth of the cost and a tenth of the time just as well. And so we spend 10 times the cost and the time to ostensibly fill people with knowledge. But in reality, it's really just all signaling that takes a really, really long time and costs a lot of money. And so you're proving through much of school, not all of school, but way too much of it for it to make any kind of economic sense, that you're smart, that you're diligent, that you're conformist, like you're going to do what you're told. When you work for a big corporation, you got to be somewhat conformist. If you're completely iconoclastic and independent thinking, you might be brilliant, but you're not going to be a really good employee. And so if you can prove all of these things through years and years of schooling, you're very employable. And that's a good thing. But it turns out that we can test directly for these things without actually taking like 6 extra years of college and grad school to teach you almost nothing in many cases, spend a crap load of your time and money, whereas a 6-month rigorous certification course could have done all of that vetting and signaling, except at 1/100th the time multiplied by effort or the time multiplied by cost. And that is a huge savings we can all have if more of us, maybe most of us, really re-articulate what it is that education is supposed to be. He's saying a few other things, that because of this incredible overvaluation of education and this assumption that almost everyone makes that more education is categorically better, we've seen a ton of educational inflation over the years. Every decade or so, you need more years of school for the same jobs that haven't gotten much more difficult to do and arguably with technology have gotten simpler and easier to do. So you're chasing the same level of credentials chasing the same jobs with ever exceeding levels of credentials. I'll put up a real good idea here for you to consider as an example. I know that for many people who work at places like Enterprise or Hertz Rent-A-Car, what they're looking for is people with college degrees. Now, if you've ever worked in a service profession like an enterprise car dealership, you quickly understand that you need nothing in college to do one of these jobs. But there's nothing you learn in college that you didn't already know in high school. If you were a C student in high school, you are fucking overqualified to work an entry-level job at Enterprise Rent-A-Car. I mean every word of that. But most of these companies prefer that you have a college degree. Why? Because there's a ton of people with college degrees, because everyone's told college is a good idea. Remember all those students when you went to school that learned nothing, and you know for a fact they learned nothing and they didn't want to be there and they were just there to pour beer all over college titties and suck it up? College is a fun time, right, Scott? Everyone loves college. Scott had no friends in college. It's okay. He made up for it by still having no friends today. Wait, that's not how that works. So it turns out that because there's lots of people around and companies can kind of pick of the litter, and almost everyone has a college degree beyond a certain level of intelligence and diligence, that you're like, yeah, why not make this qualification? At least we'll have like a really high mark and we're not like really struggling for employees. Now, I promise you, if we needed double or triple the number of people to work at a certain field, a lot of the companies would be like, we don't actually need this person to have a college degree. Like, we just hire you right in. It doesn't matter. But when they can afford to have lots of applicants, and when everyone comes out with a college degree anyway, they're like, yeah, fuck it. Like, you having 6 more years of school definitely tells us another 2% more certainty that you're a good worker. We'll take that. Is anyone on the net balance benefiting from that in the economy? No, it's a gigantic waste of time for almost everyone involved. And there's also tons of evidence presented in Bryan's work on this, especially in the book, about a massive mismatch. Most people, as objectively verified by tests of ability and memory, never use what they study or forget almost everything they study. And I can bring you an example right now. How many of you guys know trigonometry? Hey, Dylan and Scott, do you guys know trigonometry for real, in a way that if I give you some problems and you can't look on Google, you'll solve them?
Not at all.
But I'm sure you did fine in school and got good grades. I know I did. I forgot all of calculus. Nobody knows all the shit they learned. Most people forget 95% of what they learned, but they're really good at their jobs. And so the idea that school needs to fill you with knowledge is true to a point, and beyond a very low point, it's just not true at all. We know for a fact people don't know hardly shit when they graduate college. And we also know that most of the professions that require you to have a college degree don't even test anything you need to know in college. I had a friend who got an undergraduate degree at a very good school in the economics profession. He went to go work for a hedge fund afterwards, a great lucrative career. I asked him, I was like, how much of your economics knowledge do you do in the hedge fund every day? He's like, none. It was like, shut up, dude. He was like, zero. Anyone who's very smart, you can teach them how to do this hedge fund trading jobs by having them read like one book and I'm having them like just tutor on the job for a few weeks. And I was like, get the fuck out of here. He's like, yeah, that's what they did with me. I never had to use a single thing. That's most people's reports. And if you think about your friends, your family, yourself, how much of what you really learned in college are you using? There are exceptions to this in the hard sciences, but they're not nearly representative of most of education. And so why is this so out of left field? Like one of the things that impresses with me about Bryan Caplan is that his shit is so out of left field, like almost no one's saying this kind of stuff. Why is this? Why for the education one, you can probably guess some of these, but I'll go through them really quick. I mean, he's attacking education's sacred status. Schooling is seen almost universally as an unambiguous social good. You ask someone, hey, how much education is optimal? They go like, well, as much as possible. They're like, okay, really? Like there's actually, I can tell you didn't learn economics because there's the tipping point to everything. A certain amount of water is good and a certain amount of water is going to poison you or drown you. But with education, apparently there's no such thing. And it's like, how much love is too good for the world? How much healing energy between the races is too much? Like most people say like, no, we need as much as possible. And the vibes are great. And pro-education vibes are amazing. But that means almost no one ever asks like, okay, but in the real economic world, at what point is it marginally better use of your time to go to work versus continue to accrue years of education that inarguably costing a fuckload of money and a ton of time, but are not marginally on the trade-off preparing you any better to be an actual productive person or to understand the world any better. And his ideas about what to do to reform the education system kind of threaten an entire industry. It suggests that taxpayers, students, and employers all pour billions into a mostly zero-sum competition to see who can get the highest number of degrees. It insults, in some low-key sense, teachers, professors, policy wonks. It implies that their kind of life's work is for mostly like economically pointless ends. And it's a very deeply un-PC situation, because it questions the morality of subsidizing a system that's not just inefficient, but misallocates time and money substantially. And he buttresses this with a couple of really big fundamental claims. He's saying that the vast majority of education, not all of it, is signaling more than building human capital. So it's not that we're saying you're better off after college, after 4 years of learning like sociology. You're not actually better at your job as a car parts salesperson. But if you can make it through a degree and get decent grades, that you're signaling to employers you're the kind of person that's probably going to do a decent job at whatever you give them. But the thing is, and this is, you're saying, okay, fine, so education signaling, so let the education continue. But there are way easier ways to do signaling. It turns out that if you can survive a rigorous semester of education that gives you sort of like, the very core actual things you need to know, tests you very rigorously, and really has you apply yourself for like 6 months. If you can do that, then you're 95% of the way there to telling employers everything they need to know. And then you can just cut your schooling off right there. So I'm actually going to make a specific point that I don't think Bryan Caplan makes, but I'll make it because it's within the line of his focus of research, is if we replaced almost all of undergraduate education in the United States with a 6-month credentialing ready for work program dedicated to each subfield of study, we would save people 3.5 years of their time and unbelievable amount of money. And that's not it. We get people to enter the workforce way earlier and start not just saving money from not pouring it down the throats of the educational establishment, but by actually generating wealth for other people. Because guys, I hate to break it to you, but every time college students go to school and they take notes and they sit in class and they try to look up each other's skirts, which I submit that most colleges just for trying to get laid, is they're not actually producing anything of value at the time. And if we also know that they're not accruing value to spill into the economy later, nearly to the extent that we think, it's kind of a bad deal. It's kind of a bad deal. And another thing Bryan Caplan will say is that there's a huge curriculum irrelevance. Very little of what's taught in school, especially at the collegiate level, is ever used in jobs. Even there's a lot of signaling even in STEM fields, the science, technology, engineering, and all of those fields have a lot of learning to do, but you can condense that down in a tiny fraction of the time that people spend in school. The credentialing inflation thing is a really, really big problem. As more people get degrees, schooling is needed for the same jobs, because if everyone has the degree and you just want the best half of people, well, then if the best half, if almost everyone has a degree, the top half for sure have a degree. And if you don't have a degree, well, you're just left out. You're looked at as some kind of loser. And that is really a perception people have now in modern society. If you want any kind of professional job, you don't have a college degree. It's kind of a weird thing, because people are like, well, hold on a second. Like, 9 of the other applicants have college degrees. Why don't you? It's a risk they don't want to take. And so they end up just like, everyone's getting college degrees and people look down on you for not having one. Our engineering team at RP, actually the vast majority of them don't have college degrees, but they're like principal engineer level guys that can get $1 million jobs at Meta and Google anytime they want. And so they're unbelievable. We never asked if they had degrees. We could give a flying fuck. Can you do your job? But it's very unconventional. You go to most dev shops, they're going to want to know if you have degrees. It's better with software development than every other industry pretty much, because these are real raw industries. Software development is really raw as far as can you do the job? And it's very easy to find out if you're a good coder or not. But for a lot of other jobs, most other jobs, they really just prefer you have a degree to leave well enough alone. And that's a really big problem, because it continues to have lots of people spend tons of money for almost no good reason at all. And Bryan Caplan says some pretty extreme stuff. He's saying that if half of college vanished, the economy would not collapse. it would just become more efficient. And that's probably true. And this is one of these things that, having gone myself through all of schooling to a terminal PhD, so I got high school, undergrad, master's, PhD, and I've also been a professor for a long time. I can tell you with a high degree of certainty, Bryan Caplan is correct experientially, because I've mentored lots of amazing students, but these are mostly people that are just real sharp and real motivated to begin with. And all of the stuff that I would ever have to teach them could be condensed into a 6-month rapid upscaling exercise science course. And then after that, you go off and you do your own thing. The number of students I've had, God bless them, they're great people, that were in class for no discernible reason to me or them. They're just there to kind of do college. It was massive. Probably most people in my classes I don't think got anything out of those classes, and they didn't get anything out of their other classes anyway. So they just leave an exercise science program, not really knowing a lot of exercise science, not being able to demonstrate practically that they can do it, and not even having a passion for it. It's just one of these things where culturally, the next thing you do after high school is college. Otherwise, how do you get college pussy if you're not at college? It really is the whole thing, I think. Not the whole thing, but a big part of it. So Bryan Caplan would say it's a good idea to slash education spending. Subsidies are a terrible idea for education because they prop up the prices and they make tons of other people get educations that are really not a good idea. You could just stop doing that and signaling would happen on its own terms anyway. You can focus more on genuine skill building, vocational training, apprenticeships, direct to job routes that yield just much, much more actual outcomes than broad general schooling. Like I would say like a general studies liberal arts degree at college is almost completely worthless. And if you think about it, it's almost completely worthless, but it costs a sum total of $120,000 over 4 years. And it doesn't mean over 4 years like it's a divided thing. It's an integrated sum of you spent independently 4 fucking years of your life almost wasted, but it wasn't for free. It was also, you paid $120,000 for that. It starts to look like a really, really bad deal. He would say it's a good idea to stop considering like the social equity part of education, stop pushing people into college, because a lot of times that deepens inequalities, because we know that college doesn't really upskill you a whole lot. And if you go through college and you're poorer, you just end up with a crap load of debt. If we had a different system that didn't require people to go to college, if we had rapid action credentialing and very intensive courses to upskill people before they're ready for work, we would be solving a ton of problems. Big deal. Huge deal. Now, many of you will have listened to this little educational blurb and been like, dude, this is nuts. You're crazy. There's no way everyone's wrong about education. Bryan Caplan's out to lunch. Give some videos a look. Give some articles and blogs of his a look. And if you really want, read his book, The Case Against Education. You will walk away at least jaundiced, if not like converted to like, wow, holy shit, he's just right. Because he accesses the same empirical literature everyone else does. Again, Bryan Caplan's, one of his huge talents is seeing the politically incorrect implications in reality and going, hey, this is a thing. And everyone's like, shut up. Don't say that. You're not supposed to ask that question. How dare you? And he's asking that question, which I know a lot of you guys on the channel really like that kind of forbidden knowledge. I'm personally fascinated by it. More forbidden knowledge. Number 2. Poverty, Who's to Blame, is a title of a lecture series and a future incoming book that Bryan Caplan is working on. He said a lot about this. I'll summarize it really quickly. And what he basically does is he analyzes why poverty happens, and he comes to a complex plethora of conclusions, but could generally be split into 2 categories. The first category is systemic factors, mostly low economic freedom. So like the reason that Egypt and Turkmenistan are very poor as a huge part of that's to do with their economy is designed by a mentally ill child, or must be, because that just ignores almost every principle of economics. Meanwhile, Norway and Singapore and Japan have systems that just end up taking any given human, doesn't matter who they are, and making them way more productive. And so that's one of the number 1 reasons why poverty is a thing. To look no further, just compare North and South Korea, the identical genetic people. One country starves to death half the time. The other country has more money than they know what to do with. The only difference is the economic system. The other thing that Bryan Caplan says, and this is the very, very politically incorrect part, is that the other quote unquote half of why some people are poor and some are not is because the poorer people, check this out, his words, not mine, though I completely agree with him, and most of you do too in your private lives. It's just not some shit you like to say out loud. A big reason why people are poor is because they just continue to make bad decisions that lead them to be poor, versus people who are wealthy over the course of long term continue to make marginally better decisions. Now, of course, inheritance plays a role, and there are other factors to that, and social and cultural factors play a role, but the two biggest roles are occupied by poor decision-making and shit economic systems. You get people who on average make very good decisions, and they're in a very good economic system, they will almost never be poor. You get people that make a lot of bad decisions and have a poor economic system, and they're almost never going to be wealthy. You have to attend to both of these things, and neither one of these things are really politically correct to say from out of any perspective, because if you say, people make it, bad decisions, and that like it's kind of on them. Leftists don't love that, but then again, so conservatives support a lot of policies like restrictions on immigration, which are terrible economically, and they just have a lot of feelings about them. Again, as usual, Bryan Caplan is making very few friends saying these things, but they're probably true things. It's so out of left field because blaming people for poverty is like, what? Like, no doubt what I just said is a clip that's going to be taken out of context. There will be people in the comment section of this video getting real butthurt about the shit I say. Now, a lot of people just get butthurt. That's kind of what they do for fun, but it's a real nasty thing to say. So let's take a look at kind of the fundamental claims here that are being said. A huge fraction of poverty is caused by government mismanagement of the economy against principles. Facts. Very straightforward. There is Botswana, which is run very well as an economy in Africa, and there's Zimbabwe, which is run seemingly as a cruel joke against its people. The other thing is that a huge fraction is caused by people making bad decisions. Many of the people making these decisions, and check this out, know that they're bad decisions, but just have really short-term priorities. I like doing this, and I'm going to do it right now, versus working towards building wealth in the future. There is an example Bryan Caplan gives which really hits you straight in the face. I'm about to paraphrase this example. This interview was conducted with a gentleman in Africa who was out and had money ready, and he was about to buy beer. He was buying beer for himself to drink. And the interviewer was like, okay, do you have children at home? Yes. Do the children have adequate protection against malaria with mosquito netting? No. Do you have enough money for mosquito netting? Do you know that the money you're using to buy beer is actually way more than enough money to buy adequate mosquito protection from your children? He was like, yeah, oh yeah. And they're like, so are you really still going to buy the beer? And he was like, uh-huh. And they're like, why? He's like, I want beer. And that's as far as he was interested in thinking about it. Now, people on the political lefts, huge hearts, and truthfully believe, and in many cases are correct, that we can really help people by educating them, by empowering them, by changing social structures and systems to facilitate their betterment. Facts. But in this instant, when you tell someone, hey, look, you clearly have enough money to buy mosquito netting, but you're using it exclusively for entertainment for yourself and not for your children. What's up with that? And he's like, you know what I'm saying? YOLO. What the fuck do you say to that? So when you ask why malaria rates are high, there are many different answers that are part of that equation. But one of them is some people just don't give a shit. And that's a real thing. Super politically incorrect, my own personal observation incoming. We're going to take the whole race thing, we're going to eliminate it because race is toxic. I'm not touching that shit with a 10-foot pole. You guys know why. You go to the trailer park, all white people. And you look at how many of the people there are earnestly trying to scrimp and save, spend conservatively, and plan for a better future. And there are many people like that. Shit, J.D. Vance is like that. He's our fucking vice president. How many people, though, in the trailer park just do not give a fuck about the future and spend like they have $1 million even though they have barely 2 pennies scraped together? How many of them are really diligently working hard to get out of their circumstances? The answer is there are many of them that aren't doing any of that. And that's some of the reason why poverty exists. And we don't like to admit it because blaming the victim is wrong. It feels wrong, but what if the victim's actually to blame, though? It's really true. That's the case in some instances. We have to understand that's really what's going on. And then we have to design policy in our best interest to help people in a way that makes sense. For example, if your idea of using the government to help people is simply to give those people money and ask no questions afterwards, it's a fine idea. And it's a really great idea from the heart. But like, how many of those people are just going to use up that money on like drugs and entertainment and just like not be able to afford dental care for their children afterwards? A ton. Some of them won't do that. They'll use the money in all the right ways, but a bunch will just use it in a really crappy ways. And so if you don't understand that almost always precisely the poor people that you want to help, that a huge fraction of them are the very same people who make terrible decisions with money, giving them more money usually just doesn't solve that problem. It might make it marginally a little better, but sometimes not even. And so this is an instant critique of general universal basic income. One of the normal ways in which universal basic income is conceived is you essentially take all of the money you spend on welfare, medical assistance, food assistance, you funnel all into one account, you split it up, and even forget universal basic income, just give poor people directly the money. Rich people, fine, they don't need money. Middle income people are fine. We tax everyone and we split the money up against, to all the poor people and we just give them the money. You say like, these are people who are going to now have a ton of money and they're going to get like there's hospitals you can pay for. There's food you can buy. All these things are very efficient. They're very cheap. Now you have money. You can go buy them. No big deal. Problem solved, right? The thing is that probably wouldn't solve hardly any problems because some people would diligently spend their money. Those usually aren't the people that are in the most trouble, though. The people in the most financial trouble do not spend their money well. That's kind of why they're in financial trouble half the time. The other half, it's totally circumstantial. You have some kind of brain infection. You broke your leg in a car accident. You couldn't get back to work and all of those other reasons. So half of it, 100% is not on you. But the half that is on you, we got to realize it's a real large group of people. And we have to make sure that those people, if we're going to be charitable with government funding, probably need vouchers that only work on medical care, only work on food, only work on housing, so we can make sure they're well taken care of. So they're not going to do that shit themselves. You want to argue about that? Dope. Show up in the comments. The reality is go outside and look around. Not everyone's trying their fucking hardest to be their best. And that's real, real, real. Bryan Caplan keeps it real. Reality's a certain way, fellas. We just have to deal with it in our best compassionate ways that we can. But pretending that every poor person is just a diligent, hardworking person trying their best is like pretending every rich person's a diligent, hardworking person trying their best. Lots of rich people are drug-addicted alcoholics riding on daddy's fortune. You would never say these are all angelic people that can do no wrong, but for some reason you point the light on poor people like, oh, no, they're all trying really hard and have nuclear families and never make any bad decisions. Fuck up out of here. Big deal from Bryan Caplan. Next one. Build, Baby Build is technically a graphic novel. No, it's nothing graphic like that. It's like an adult comic strip with tons of stats and info about how housing regulation is the thing that is causing pretty much all of our woes in the housing industry. And it is really, really out of left field because it calls for the end of not in my backyard policy power. It upends the quote unquote sacred right of existing homeowners to block change in their neighborhoods. Currently, if you have a house and you own your land and you want to take your house and delete it and replace it with an apartment building because you're moving somewhere else, you're going to own that apartment building. You're going to have 20 rental units in there and you're going to let 20 low-income families live there and pay you rent. You can't do it. Almost everywhere in America, it's not going to work because the people in your community have veto voting rights against what you use your land with. Now, Scott, ready for the redneck impression here? Now, I tell you what, I thought this was America, buddy. I thought I was allowed to do what I want to do with my own land. Hold up. Sheriff, you gonna come here and tell me what to do? Now, redneck vibes are dope, but say what? That's good. That's it. There you go. Scott's like, yeah, that's like half of my family. Yeah, woo! NASCAR. Yes, that's right. Solo cup beer and well on our way. So, yeah, That's a vibe, but in reality, you can't pull that off hardly everywhere because your neighbors actually get to vote on how your house looks, how tall your grass is, and what you can do with your own property. And Bryan Caplan basically says, look, one of the number one reasons why we have a hugely costly housing situation, not nearly enough dwelling units for people, a profound amount of homelessness, and even kind of newly minted college students having a real hard time affording housing is because we're telling people all the time, you can't build that, you can't build that. That big apartment building is going to take 10 years and $1 million of approval fees to get done. At every turn, there are crazy, insensate, totally nonsensical regulations preventing people from making as much housing as possible. Technically speaking, housing should be a supply and demand problem. There's lots of people out there with just $500 per month that they can spend on rent, and you own a big piece of property. You're like, is it possible for me to build a big building with a very comfortable, very cozy, very high-tech, but small apartments at which $500 a month actually can buy you a decent thing? Technologically, there's no debate. The answer is absolutely yes. But are you allowed to build? And the answer is almost always a gigantic, not, absolutely not, on your life, no way. And these answers tend to be no way precisely in major cities like San Francisco and New York City, to use two examples. And where are rents psychotically high and housing always in short supply? Precisely those cities. London is another great example of that. And Bryan Caplan frames restrictive zoning kind of as a moral outrage, not just an economic mistake, but a crime against future generations and the poor. Like, I'm sorry, who are you to tell anyone how to use their land? And if the effects of that is that poor people don't have enough housing, how are you going to pat yourself on the back and say that you're a good person? And it's really tempting to be a NIMBY person, the not in my backyard. And this is the thing I'm going to call out white people straight up. You guys talk a big ass game about, I love the poor and all the different races. Dope. Let someone build a skyrise for poor different races in your community. Well, we have got history here at Beverly Hills of a beautiful housing and we don't blah, 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 blah. Sounds like some old bullshit to me. Most people are dope to let people live somewhere else, but when it comes to their little community, they're real selfish. They don't want any development. And here's the thing, fundamentally, you don't own your community. You own your property. That's all you own. And Bryan has a bunch of really helpful ways to think about this going forward that we could easily deregulate housing, and it would be incredibly, incredibly awesome for everyone. And people like to say, usually when housing's too expensive, they get right to capitalism. They're like, oh, we need to have housing subsidies or it's capitalism is to blame. And it's actually just by really intense hyper overregulation of the housing industry. That's it. And a lot of times people say like, well, if I let, an apartment building be built next to me with tons of low income housing, the value of my home is going to be reduced. I got one for you. So what, motherfucker? Remember, your value of home is increasing while your home is actually becoming more dilapidated due to time. How is it possible? When I was a kid, I was like, people say, oh, houses gain value over time. I'm like, but houses don't get better over time. Like a house built in the 1960s is objectively worse. Like the bricks are frayed and everything by 1990s. But how is it like doubling in how much it's valued at? How does that work from basic economics perspective? Then later I learned, oh, that's right. The supply of housing is artificially kept down by regulation, which benefits homeowners just fine. Yay. And then the demand for housing, because populations keep going up and people always want more housing because as they get more wealthy, they want housing to themselves. They don't want to live in a cramped, room with 15 other people. The demand goes up. So the demand continues to skyrocket. The supply stays artificially capped, barely growing, sometimes shrinking. And all of a sudden you have, drumroll, a San Francisco or New York or every other community in the United States and around the world that is just screwing people up through these regulations. And these regulations greatly benefit individual homeowners who are already in, but at the expense of everyone on the outside, precisely those people of different races and lower income levels that you try to pat yourself on the back for being such a good person in supporting, which you should be supporting, but not like this, the opposite of this, So the implication of this kind of housing situation, there are many, many, many. I'll just give you a few that Bryan Caplan lists out. He is supporting massive upzoning, expansive, no more real crazy zoning and deregulation. He wants to end most single family zoning. What does that mean? You can absolutely build single family homes where you have them. But if you want to build an apartment on your little property that you have, and you can guarantee that you follow basic modern safety standards, you're good to go. Build away. No problem. No problem. You would instantly have high density housing everywhere instantly a few years later after it gets built. How do we know this? Tokyo, Hong Kong, etc., have profoundly low levels of their housing rates. The rental property cost is actually quite low. It's crazy. You're living in some of the world's most dynamic cities. How is that possible? It turns out you could just build more apartment buildings. Isn't that insane? Whereas in New York City, if you want to build a new apartment building, you can do it one of two ways. Not do it because it's basically illegal, or zone as luxury housing to which rent control laws don't apply. Yay. And then you build a ton of luxury housing. Hey, if you want luxury housing in New York City, Scott, you know all those apartments on East River and on Hudson overlooking the rivers, and there's new ones, new condo units every year? They're all over the place, except they're all $5,000 a month for rent or $2 million to buy a unit. That doesn't apply to most people. And we talk about, well, what kind of housing can most people be in? That shit is basically illegal to build because they're well, no, it's going to violate the dynamics of the neighborhood, whatever. Another thing Bryan Caplan recommends is to kind of shift or eliminate veto power at the neighborhood level. At a state level, sure, regulations are better. At a federal level, they're even better. Ideally, none of those things either. But definitely what we don't want is community by community level regulations where people just say, in our neighborhood, you can only build housing that looks like this. You get enough of those communities and all of a sudden they know where to build homes because everyone gets to their little community. It's like people in San Francisco I've heard say well, I just want San Francisco to be the same as it was in 1960 when I grew up. Okay, I'm sorry, but there's 3 times more people in the world. Are you out of your fucking mind? Or are you cool to label yourself as a classist elitist? How many people in San Francisco are ready to just take on the elitist classist label, you think? Zero. They're I'm an Antifa. I'm fighting against classism. You are classism. Or let poor people construct housing anywhere they want. Oh, is that? Oh, you got complicated ideas about it because your mommy and daddy left you a $3 million home that's 1,000 square feet. Got it. Cool argument. If we do this, if we massively deregulate safety regulations at a very basic level only, and that's it, you can expect way more housing, way cheaper housing, way better housing, higher economic growth, and massively lower inequality. And the best part, massively lower homelessness. Some people are homeless, maybe the majority, from just straight up, per one of his other points, sheer degeneracy. Some combination of drug addiction, mental illness, low IQ, and low work proclivity. It sucks. It's a real thing. But a ton of people are homeless simply because their output is they could potentially afford $300 a month for rent, but no more. And all the rent starts at $500. But if you knew this as a developer and you go, man, there's lots of people out there that can afford $300 a month of rent. What if I build very, very slick, modern efficiency apartments that have bunk beds in them and stuff? And then $300 a month rent, and you can have 4 roommates. Every person pays $75 a month, and you can have decent rent with a little stove, a little fridge, little couch area, and air conditioning and all that good stuff. There are actually rules on the books that if a house, if a domicile, an apartment isn't big enough per some number of people, they're well, it's unethical to even allow it. Oh, cool. Do you know what the alternative is? People live in the fucking street. If you tell people you can only have a house, imagine aliens came to Earth and they saw how ridiculously we were living because they're so much richer with their $1 trillion AI technology. And they're okay, for any human to live in not a LeBron James sized mansion is unethical. Every human needs their own garden and their own koi pond and their own swimming pool and their own basketball court. I can't believe you let people live any worse than this. And what they do is they literally make illegal all of our current housing except for the 3 billionaires that live like I just described. They're going to put us all out of house. We are all going to be homeless except for 3 billionaires. When you artificially constrain who can build apartments where and what kinds of sizes you'll allow people to live in, the alternative isn't, yay, now people just live in nice apartments. Where? They don't exist. Now people live in the fucking street. And that's a huge problem that we can easily solve with just massive deregulation. It would be so straightforward to do, but most people just don't think it's a good idea. Because, to Bryan Caplan's perennial point, most people just think a lot of things and they quote unquote know things that are not actually true. They know things that are the opposite of the truth and they're very convinced about them. You want to treat housing as infrastructure, not as a privilege. There is a moral imperative to allow people to build and live where the opportunities are. So I would see New York City and I'd be like, man, we could easily have the average rent in New York City be $300 to $500 a month within just a few years. How? Just anyone who has a plot of land is able to build apartments of any size, of any number of units, no problem. You do that, all of a sudden New York gets like fucking 50 extra skyscrapers, which looks sweet. And then there's plenty of apartments for everyone. And almost every argument against that is going to be two things, based on feelings alone and wrong. All right, next one. The myth of the rational voter. This is a huge one. This book was my introduction to Bryan Caplan's thinking, and it's like a sleeper. This book is crazy. So it's basically saying, this book and a ton of articles and videos he did about this, it was written in 2007, so it's been around for a while, is that democracy produces bad policies, not so much because the voters are uninformed, though that's part of the problem, but often it produces bad policies because voters are systematically irrational about economics and policy. They basically think a lot of things that are true, but those things aren't true, and they're systematic about it. So most people have opinions that are predictable and wrong at the very same time. Generally, they hold 4 very easily documentable biases. These are voters in the United States, and actually the rest of the world, they hold basically the same biases. The anti-market bias, the anti-foreign bias, the make-work bias, and the pessimistic bias. Let's talk about them all really, really quick. The anti-market bias is basically like when you have 2 people come through and one person has something to sell and one person has something to buy and they both think it's a good idea and they trade hands or trade money and trade products. Like I give money and the guy at the gas station gives me a Diet Coke. Almost every economist will tell you that's a net positive transaction, and almost every regular person will tell you someone's getting fucked over and someone's really getting the other person going. People just don't understand markets, and they think that markets are bad or somehow unjust, and that purposeful government action is more ethical than market action. And almost all of that is completely backwards and wrong. Markets substantially produce better outcomes in almost every case than government-initiated action. But people just don't think that. They think the opposite of that. So if you tell people, hey, let's liberalize the markets and expand the free market, most people are like, ooh, that sounds like a bad idea. And most people are completely wrong on that. The other one is anti-foreign bias. People will say, no, I don't know about foreign-made goods, and I don't know about foreign workers, and I don't like immigrants and all that other stuff. And all 3 of those are wrong, wrong, wrong. When you're buying products, you should be buying on quality and price. It does not matter where they come from. Do you guys know why it doesn't matter? Because it does not matter where they come from. Do you want high quality and low price, or do you want some mystical made in the USA shit? I don't even know why you want it. Guess what? You don't know why you want it either. You just have a lot of feelings about it. And we'll get to this in the last summary. Bryan Caplan says that the more immigration we have, to a huge extent, the more wealthy all of us become. So the anti-foreign bias also extends to like not welcoming immigrants, and immigration is a phenomenal booster of the economy for almost everyone who lives in the economy. Most people don't think that, and so they have this anti-foreign bias, which is really bad news. Evidence: Donald Trump's tariffs, almost universally derided by economists as a shooting yourself in the foot idea, and massively supported by lots of people who do not understand economics, but worse than that, and this is what Bryan is saying, I don't understand electrical engineering, and this is to use one of his examples, or rocketry design. I don't know solid fuel rockets versus liquid fuel rockets. I don't know about phases and the different components of a rocket, but like most people, like almost all people, I have no passionate ideas about it. If Elon says we need solid fuel rockets tomorrow, I'm not like, how really solid fuel is so ridiculous. I have no idea. Is that good? Is that bad? I have no idea. And I also don't give a shit in the sense that if you tell me like, actually it is a good idea, I'm like, oh, okay. If you tell me like it's a really bad idea, I'm like, oh, okay. I don't have a preconceived notion of it that I'm really emotionally tied to. But with economics, and specifically these biases, people really, if you tell people, hey, immigration's a net benefit for almost everyone in the economy and long term for everyone, they're going to be like, I don't know, man. Why? They'll give you reasons All of those reasons, 99 times out of 100, are surface level justifications for internal deep feelings. The other one is the make work bias. The make work bias is the belief that government can give you jobs. Like a lot of politicians will be like, we're going to bring more jobs to our country. We're going to make jobs. How the hell do you make jobs? Where do jobs come from? We actually do have a video on that exact subject. And the TLDR is jobs are not a thing you're entitled to. Jobs don't somehow exist magically in the world as either ethereal entities. Jobs only exist because people want certain things. And if you raise your hand and you're like, I can give you what you want, I can do that thing. Now you have a job. How can government make a job? Well, it actually can pretty simply. You say, hey, guess what? We're going to employ 100 Americans to dig ditches out in the desert and fill them back up with sand. Government can give you money. Government can give a place to live and give you medical care. And you say, see, now those people aren't unemployed. They have jobs. I got you. So what is the benefit of those people doing that? They have jobs and some Keynesian stuff where they can spend money in the economy. Okay, cool. But government could just have not ever tax the money away from people and it would get spent anyway. Right. Okay. So the job is functionless, right? Okay. But what's the cost? They have to pay every person $50,000 a year. Okay, cool. So tell me again about how government can actually make jobs. Isn't government's job to allow a place in the market where people who have a demand get a supply of jobs? Isn't it about facilitating the creation of jobs that naturally emerge as we need things to be done? You can't actually make work. It's like when you're building a fort or something with your friends. And the following is a joke, be easy. You're 8 years old, 9 years old with your friends, you're building a fort. And they're like, hey, hang out with your little sister, give her a job. And she's 3. And you look at her and you're like, with nothing in fort building, she is either safely going to be able to do or remotely competently going to be able to do, and she's going to drag away attention from us. Now, of course, you let your little sister come in and build a fort because she's adorable and she's 3 and you love her. It's the right thing to do. But you don't do things like that in an economy because you actually can't create a job for her. All the jobs are already doing what they're supposed to be doing. You can't just say, hey, get this person involved. That's the make work bias, is government coming in and we're going to make work happen. Work's not something you make happen. It has to supply a demand. And if a demand exists and you have a supply to it in the free market, you already have that problem really solved. So the make work bias is really terrible because politicians get elected saying, we're going to provide hundreds of new jobs by, putting money into this industry. Where did you get that money out of? Is that money already being better spent doing something else? The answer is almost always yes. But people don't think about that way because, again, people don't know economics largely. And so they vote like this, but they're really sure that the government can make jobs instead of just not sure about it. The last bias, these are very well demonstrated biases, is the pessimistic bias. You've no doubt heard me talk about it a bunch. It's where people will just have negative views about the trajectory of overall development and the economy for no good reason. Most people know that things back in the day were better. Right? In the 2000s, they were better. In the 1980s, they were better still. Shit, in the 1950s, we were living large. Except every single thing I just said is backwards wrong. There is no more prosperous time than today. Not ever by a long shot. And in 10 years, we'll be oodles more prosperous. Things get better all the time, almost all the time. If you have an optimistic bias, it would actually be more realist than even just base reality. If you say, well, things are about the same back then as now, you would still be wrong. Most people think things are getting worse. And it's easy to get politicians to do real dumb shit if they say things have been getting worse. Guys, I have a quick example. Donald Trump's slogan, "Make America Great Again." Well, when was America greater than today? Objectively, never. So how are we making it great again? How the fuck do people fall for that shit? Because they have the pessimistic bias and they erroneously deeply believe that things used to be better, and that's wrong. And so what ends up happening is democracy aggregates these biases. People go to the voting booth, they vote with these biases. It aggregates them into bad policies. And this is majoritarian error, not random error. It's not like some people know about technical stuff in economics. Some people don't. They vote randomly, it cancels out, and then the experts actually come in and fix everything. It's not like that. You have a class of experts, formally trained professional economists, that are like, hey, so this is probably how we should run the economy. And you have a huge fraction of most voters voting against them time and time again. the Zohran Mamdani, or whatever his name is, I probably got that wrong, just won a primary race for New York mayor, and like at least half of his economic policies are the equivalent of like burning an economics textbook. Just total batshit crazy, insane wrong. He's proposed that the city of New York run government-operated grocery stores. I mean, this is like you answer this on a test in Econ 101 in college, like they fail you on the spot. This is just awful. But lots of people think that's a great idea, and most economists are like, this is like one of the worst ideas ever. How come these people think that? Because people have these damn near inborn biases to think that things like that are going to work. And so people consistently vote in bad policies for themselves. Lots of other stuff to say about this. But it's I just want to bring up why it's so out of left field to say this and why it's so not politically correct. Democracy is understandably, and with good reason, a sacred cow. Questioning voter wisdom is just like basically farting in the cathedral of Western civilization to some extent. It's a real big deal. And it shreds the PC notion that everyone supports, Republicans, Democrats, everyone in between, that people know best. That when you liberate people to be democratic, that they know best. Guys, right now, Iraq has a democracy, and a serious proposal is to allow 9-year-old girls to be married off to people. Are the Iraqi voters good at running a country? The answer is probably not. Evidence? All of Iraq's history, and now recent history, even with democracy. It turns out that if you let 7th graders run a classroom, they run it into the ground. If you let non-professional economists, regular voters, determine economic policy in a huge nation, they generally do kind of a shit job of it, and then you get predictably really bad stuff. And it essentially, Bryan's work kind of accuses democracy of self-harm. You liberalize the voting rights, you let people vote, and a lot of people consistently make such bad decisions that the economy performs worse and worse and worse over time. There's so much evidence of this in modern times. Greece basically bankrupted themselves through the 90s and 2000s by voting in a ton of awesome largesse for the government, for people to get benefits from, and they weren't voting in higher enough taxes to pay for that, and they just ran out of money. Argentina, until Milei took over a couple of years ago, was doing the exact same thing, and you see this in almost every major city in the United States. Real bad policy, people continuing to vote even worse policy into effect. Things get worse and they go, the solution for this is even more bad policy. Big deal, really big deal. And so the implications of this work are, I mean, you could have a whole book about them. I'll just cite a couple of it. Democratic outcomes are skewed towards bad economics. Inefficient, anti-market, anti-innovation policies prevail, and most people think this is a good idea. Kind of a bad sign for democracy. His work also really steelmans what you would call technocracy, kind of a rule by the competent, and basically by saying and demonstrating through tons of empirical evidence that experts are actually less wrong on average than regular people. And it really, I think, supports in the end a system where we definitely do not want overrepresentation of expertise in policy decision, because you don't want people to be made to do things they don't agree with, for sure. So we're not going to say, because some people say, well, we'll just have an IQ test or an economic literacy test and that's who votes. Well, whatever government's in charge is going to change that IQ test or economic literacy test to be a political ideology test. All of a sudden, only crazy ideological people are running the whole country. That's not going to work. But what it really does support is the following idea that, but for a few core central things, people just shouldn't be voting on a lot. Like direct democracy is a dope idea, but most things just shouldn't be up for a vote. Fundamentally, how the economy runs should be mostly free market. How the economy runs in a technical way, like the central banking system, how that works, who's setting the various dealings with other nations, that should be technical people that are elected just by general representation to be good at their technical jobs and accomplish very objective things like make sure our country continues to be as prosperous as possible in the long term. That really is the only thing you should be voting for. And on the economic front, everything else you either leave to the experts to run that tiny part that they run, and the rest of it should just be free markets. Because if we have democracy voting on tons of specific policies, you're asking regular people to vote on specific economic policies. And that's really bad, about as bad as having regular people tell a surgeon what vein or artery to cut next in heart surgery. Why the fuck would you ever do that? Except the economy is orders of magnitudes more complex than heart surgery. That's a real thing. And you're asking people with very passionate ideas about heart surgery who have absolutely no education in heart surgery to tell the heart surgeons how to do their job. How can this not produce a disaster? It's surprising that it doesn't produce as much of a disaster as it does. So this is a big deal. So democracy is really dope. But what people should be getting a chance to vote on should be very small. What people freely choose to do should be really large, because we know that a lot of people, when they get a chance to vote on a lot of stuff, they really think they know things where they really just fucking don't. Big deal. Big deal. All right. Last one is Open Borders, The Science and Ethics of Immigration, another book by Bryan Caplan, and it's phenomenal. I'm going to sum this one up super quick. I don't want this video to get too long in the tooth. This is really straightforward. It turns out that there is a demand in any given country for labor. Like there's a certain number of jobs that we want to get done, and humans with their hands and their minds can get these jobs done. And then there's a supply of labor. How many humans with hands and minds do you have? And then there is a boundary around those two things called the national border. And the demand for labor in almost every case vastly outstrips the supply. The number of wants people have and money willing to pay for those wants is almost always higher than the number of people that are able to satisfy those wants. That asymmetry is fundamental to the human condition. But it also means that what would happen if we just brought in more people to do more work? The answer is more wants get fulfilled, the amount of wealth in the economy multiplies, and then the people that you brought in to supply that labor also have more wants. And they go, hey, everyone else, I got money. Can I buy stuff from you? And then so all of the workers that were already in the economy now just have even more work to do because they're supplying still more people with their jobs. That flywheel, as far as we can tell in economics, has no top end. It is better to have 2 people in your economy than 1. It is better to have 11 people in your economy than 12. It is better to have 3 billion people, I do mean 3 billion, in the United States than 300 million. More immigration is almost always better. So the ideal immigration policy is to have very minimal restrictions on who comes in. You basically do it like this. Hello. Do you have a history of terrorism? Not really a questionnaire, but something you investigate about a person. Are you a criminal? If you're not a criminal and you're not trying to destabilize the United States, come on in and go to work. And guess what? First generation immigrants get no voting rights on policy at all. Fuck it. Easy solve. You want to come in and contribute and do your best? Show up, work, get all the benefits, pay your taxes. Everything's great. You want to vote on how to change our great nation, the United States? Only citizens can do that. So if you have kids here and they grow up and go to our school system, sweet. You know what I'm saying? You get to vote finally, but you're not going to get to vote because you just can't come in and start changing a country's laws. Respect, total respect. You institute that policy. And as long as someone's not a criminal, and by the way, if by the time, you apply for after 5 years, you can apply to be a citizen, still can't vote because you weren't born here, but you get all the cool citizenship benefits. If before you get citizenship, you are convicted of a relatively serious crime, not like speeding or something, but like hurting someone or stealing, out you go and you can't come back for 20 years, depending on the crime, maybe ever. Right? So we've just solved the immigrants or criminals problem entirely because all the criminals either don't come in or get weeded out. And we bring in all the labor we want, and we solve the voting problem. So just sitting here, just postulating for 2 seconds, I fucking solved immigration. And you're welcome. All jokes aside, the economics of this are mind-boggling. Bryan Caplan estimates that if we allowed free immigration, then we would double the world's GDP pretty much kind of overnight. Well, think about it this way. How many people in China, in India, in Nigeria are talented as shit and could be here doing amazing work for our country and for the rest of us? The answer is billions. So why the fuck are they over there in poor-ass countries that are managed terribly and restrict most of their civil rights? I don't know, ethnocentrism or something Donald Trump said or something like that? It makes no sense whatsoever. And by the way, before you get all crabby about it, remember that very likely your 23andMe reveals that you are an immigrant to this country. And unless you happen to be literally Native American, your ancestors came not from the North American plains. You feel me? You're from England, you're from somewhere else. And because you came, other than the whole genocide of Native Americans, which is one of the great tragedies of history, the more immigrants that come into America ever since its founding, the better America gets. And if you have a problem with cultural alterations that's too rapid, don't let the immigrants vote. Just let their children vote once they've been through the school system, fully indoctrinated to Team USA. And if you think crime is a problem, do not let criminals in. And if people commit crimes that are of a sufficient serious offense before they've received citizenship, out they go and to never return. It's not that complicated. But what you have to do is free your mind really quick of the idea that immigrants are bad and the idea that, well, we got America for Americans. Every single country in the world would benefit massively from free immigration policies, except for the countries that really suck. If you let everyone from Turkmenistan who wants leave Turkmenistan and come to the free nations of the world, Turkmenistan would lose 80% of its population. Good. And you know what they would do if they hired a team of professional economists? Be like, oh, we're losing people. We're going to run out of money. We're not going to have a country in a few days if this keeps going. Well, guess what? You turn Turkmenistan into a mega Singapore, liberalize the shit out of the economy, liberalize all the freedoms, and all of a sudden people are like, wait a minute, I'm from here. I grew up in Turkmenistan. I speak the language. I love the people. I love the culture. Now Turkmenistan's a great place to do business and work and accumulate a lot of wealth, and no one's coming after me for various political views. I'm going to stay. And this it leads to a huge competition among all the countries of the world to attract labor. People say the brain drain is a bad thing when talented people from a country leave and go somewhere else. It's the greatest goddamn thing ever, because those countries they're coming from do not deserve those brains, because they have dog shit policies that don't let those people explore their full potential. How many people from Singapore, from Taiwan are clawing desperately to get to America? Almost no one. Why? Because they can have full bloom over there. Massive, liberalized global immigration is just an unbelievable good. And almost every argument against it is just people having a lot of feelings and mostly ethnocentrism. That's Bryan's big point. All right, folks, those are 5 ideas that are, I think, massive from Bryan Caplan. Now, here's the thing. I don't always agree with Bryan Caplan. For example, on AI, Bryan Caplan has stated, I don't know if he's changed his opinion, but he stated that he thinks AI is like a bit overrated maybe, and that AI is like never going to be like a real human or human above value. I disagree with that completely. However, I always want to know what he thinks, because if you have a sacred cow, he's got the knife for it. And even if you think, but like, okay, obviously all really smart people think this, or this is obviously true, that might not be the case. With Bryan, you find out that the things you thought were true, that were obvious, might not be as obvious as you thought. And things you had never even considered turn out to be realities that you have to consider. Now, in order to read Bryan Caplan's work and appraise it really well, you got to bring in a low level of preconceived notion and bias. You have to recognize inside of yourself when what you read from Bryan Caplan or what you hear on a podcast he was on gets you going emotionally isn't actually evidence against it. If he says something about immigration being awesome and you hate that idea, you have to be able to tell logic and reason of why immigration could be bad versus your feelings of it being bad. And the only way to tell thoughts from feelings is to have a deep presence of mind, usually curated for months and years in deep meditative practice. And for that, that's right, baby, we got the Waking Up app. There's a link in the description. You can click on it. And what I like to do is one of 2 things. Either I use Sam Harris's Waking Up app with which to meditate pretty much daily, or I simply stare at pictures of Sam Harris and imagine how he looks naked. And I'm not going to judge you for either one of those. I've been Dr. Mike, and I'll see you guys next time. Scott, when do you think Sam Harris is just going to not let this happen anymore and toss out the sponsorship?
We're doing our best.
We're doing our best, Sam. We're doing our best. See you guys.